So here on Plutocracy now, we're talking about the TransPacific Partnership, the TPP. And the TPP is another one of those massive trade agreements with primarily countries in the Pacific realm, Trans-Pacific region. So the United States
secret.
That's correct.
We can't handle the truth.
They don't believe that you can handle the truth. No,
the negotiations are secret. Not
Obama's got it covered,
agreement.
right, Joey? Obama wouldn't hurt us with this TPP. It wouldn't be just a global corporate ploy to screw over the working class and countries across the world.
Oh, of course not.
Of course not.
The commander-in-chief knows what he's doing.
We all know that
he's got our back,
every trade agreement has worked out great for the United States ever.
So Joey, where do you stand on this? Because
of course.
I saw that Obama sticker on your car.
Yeah, there is an Obama sticker on the car. Oh no, I'm never. 40 years from now, while driving a still car.
What's this TPP? He's trying to fast track the TPP. Fast track it.
Yeah.
I mean, I could
here's what fast track is for people that don't know. Is
slipping in the butthole real quick before anyone notices.
Fast track is normally Congress has to approve trade agreements. And fast track would basically say the president, that's basically Congress waiving their right to approve it. That's just them saying, okay, we trust or we're okay with the president doing this, and he can just go ahead and sign and make
pretty much all Republicans are on board with it, right?
Well, it depends because
Really?
there's really not a partisan divide on this issue. You have Democrats who tend to be either conservative to moderate and also tend to be on the Obama wing of the party, and they favor it primarily because he does. And there's some people that supported NAFTA in a way. The Republicans, you have pro-business, some quote-unquote pro-business Republicans, people that are supported by the Chamber of Commerce, like John McCain, people like that also are in favor of it because they're traditionally in favor of free trade and American business interest. At the same time, you have both the kind of Tea Party and Libertarian wing of the Republican Party, like Rand Paul and Justin Amash and others, that don't support the fast track because, number one, they don't like Obama and they don't trust him, but number two, they don't like the lack of transparency. And then you have progressive and labor-backed Democrats, those with close ties to unions like Sherrod Brown of Ohio, for example, who do not favor it at all and are in much opposition to it. The entire Congressional Progressive Caucus is another example.
So the dynamics are pretty bipartisan.
Yeah, because their concern
I guess what I'm having a hard time understanding is, are you guys against TPP because of the way it's being done? Because of the way the free trade is being negotiated in secret, or are you against it because it's free trade?
Probably both.
But
honestly.
yeah, exactly. I mean,
because I would imagine it's more the latter than the former. I think you're just bringing up that negotiations for these kinds of things typically are kept pretty tight until it's released.
It's not
whether
just
it's
free trade either, but there's also been WikiLeaks. So I read the environmental leak, and it was really. It's just the same bullshit. It's as, like the WTO and stuff have going on. Where
exactly.
They'll basically have their own little judiciary, adjudicating on these different issues over like environmental spills. It won't be. It won't be like governments that happen in that nation's responsibility.
Well,
international law or international.
I'm going to speak up for Bridgemont, and Bridgemont is black, as we all know, and Representative Hank Johnson, Democrat from DeKalb County, Georgia, is black also, and so they're good friends. And
see the connection.
Representative Hank Johnson said any new trade agreement will not make the same mistake as those, for example, like in the 1990s, like NAFTA. So I think your the mistrust is a little bit misplaced, Scott, because clearly we have a reputable black man from the black community in Atlanta who's saying, this is going to be legitimate.
Well, regardless of his position, I would say the problem is that in a way we know that those trade agreements have not worked out. The promises made by the Clinton administration and others in regards to NAFTA and the WTO have not come true, have not come to fruition.
What are those promises?
If you look back at the original, claims and supports for the NAFTA agreement, which is a certain number of jobs created, the easier trade between the United States and Mexico and Central America, and so on and so forth. That those things have not come true, and jobs have been lost because more jobs have been exported south of the border.
Now, are you saying that because studies have said that,
yes,
or because you feel that way? Because I've seen studies
have said that. Ross Perot was right on this issue back when he said the giant sucking sound of jobs. He was correct on this issue, as were many others, Ralph Nader.
All right, well,
here's
what I find strange. I find a couple things strange about this. I find it odd that a lot of the same people who say that they're so concerned about third world countries or about poorer countries, that they're so worried about what's going on in Central America and what's going on in Asia and in Mexico, they say that on the one hand.
It doesn't help.
But then on the other
countries.
hand, when it comes to something that actually could help them in a dramatic way that foreign aid could never come close to,
I'll tell you
which
why.
is free trade. Don't cut me off. Free trade has done more than anything else that we've ever seen before to bring up poor countries and make them much better off. We see this in China. Japan used to be that. Korea is still going through this. So that's the first thing that is odd to me. The second thing that's odd to me is that, indeed, we do lose jobs at first in the same way that we lose jobs when technologies come along that replace workers. We do lose some jobs at the beginning for free trade. But that allows us to then specialize in other industries that make a lot more money, that have jobs that are much higher in quality. So it's a win-win situation. On the one hand, we get to say, look at how much better the developing world is. Look how much better off they are because of free trade. And on the other hand, now we get to specialize in all the fun stuff, the big stuff, the crazy stuff.
Well, actual free trade, as in nations trading with one another and importing and exporting goods, I'm fine with. I'm not a protectionist. I don't believe that we shouldn't trade with our neighbors. My specific issues with these agreements. So I agree with you that South Korea, Japan, many other nations have found economic success and better lives for their citizens because of the trade that they've done, especially with exports. The problem is that if you look at any trade agreement, they do two things. Number one, they tend to enforce the situation with sweatshop labor, be it Haiti, Bangladesh, wherever it may be.
How do they do that?
Because there's policies in place in regards to corporate immunity for violations. For example, there's certain immunity clauses for companies like Nike or Dow Chemical Company with the Bhopal thing in India, where these nations make themselves immune from criminal or being sued or criminal prosecution in order to operate in these third world countries. So you enforce, in many ways, the policies like sweatshops and child labor that I don't think any of us would probably promote.
And you're saying that this comes from free trade agreements?
Yes.
Or
there are clauses in the TPP related to corporate immunity in these nations.
I didn't realize that we knew what was in the TPPs. I thought everything was secret at this point.
There's been leaks, and there's also
we've had negotiating proposals that have been leaked, but not actual.
Okay, I'll give you a specific
example. Well, that's all we have to go off of because it's all top
yeah.
secret. So I don't know why you're just placing your faith.
I'll give you a specific example.
Because I wouldn't place my faith in anything on TPP from that point.
I'll give you a specific example that's verified that even the Obama administration would admit. There is a clause in TPP related to prescription medication, these drug makers, pharmaceutical companies, where they would get basically the equivalent of U.S. patent law, something like 10 to 15-year patents on pharmaceutical medication, and prevent generic overseas companies like, let's say, a drug maker in India or Australia from making the drugs cheaper. Now, here's why that matters. Let's say you're an HIV/AIDS patient, whether you be in the United States, in Africa, in anywhere in the world, you have HIV/AIDS, you have a very expensive prescription medication that you have to take to live, basically to survive. And right now, let's say the only company that makes that is Merck or a company like that, major pharmaceutical company. And your medicine costs thousands of dollars a month or thousands of dollars a week. Now, maybe people in the West can afford that, but it's still a sizable part of our budget. Now, in Africa, where you make $5 a day, are you going to be able to afford that HIV/AIDS medication you need? Probably not. Now, let's say a company in India wants to come along and make a generic version of that drug that can be made for, let's say, $10 a week. I'm just using an example. That's a perfect example of something people would generally say helps the world. Although companies need to make money and deserve credit for their research and make a profit. At the same time, I think it's very.
Why do these have to be secret, dude? Why is it so important that these? I mean, dude, even congressmen who can't.
For the first thing I want to point out is none of that had anything to do with sweatshots or with corporate immunity.
Here's why it matters.
I understand why it matters, but here's.
This. Should we sign an agreement that we willfully know will prevent people both in our country and in poor developing countries from being able to get life-saving or essential medicines cheaper and have a better quality of life?
This is difficult coming from two directions. Because on the one hand, you have companies in the U.S. and Switzerland and elsewhere, they're spending lots of money on developing these pharmaceuticals. And in order to spend all that money, they need profits that justify that. They need to be able to say, hey, look, we've got a patent, and this patent is going to be respected in other developed countries.
That's right.
On the flip side, you've got companies in India that then just say, we're going to copy that technology. We're not going to spend any of the money that they did on developing such a complex drug. We're just going to copy their stuff, and then we're going to sell it at dirt low prices, and we're going to sell it in rich developed countries that can clearly afford to pay much more than this. And so we're going to sell it dirt cheap in Japan. We're going to sell it dirt cheap in South Korea. And that is a problem. On the flip side, you also pointed out that there is something very different going on if you take a country like Vietnam. You know, in Vietnam, they can't afford to pay for something that expensive. So there's definitely two sides to this. And I wish that in this way, I wish that we knew what was going on in the negotiations. I understand why they're being kept secret, but
I want to know.
But I just imagine it'd be very fascinating to see what kind of debate that they're having. But no, I don't agree with.
Here's one thing we do know:
the idea that these trade deals are encouraging sweatshops or giving corporations immunity. I've never heard of that or seen that before.
It's consistently been proven. Just look at what happened with the building collapse in Bangladesh not too long ago.
And do we have any free trade deals with Bangladesh?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. We've signed multiple trade agreements all the time. There was one with South Korea.
I mean, other than like global trade deals or World Trade Organization stuff, I don't think we have one with Bangladesh.
Because of free trade that I rarely hear anyone talking about. Over the last couple of years, the WTO has ruled against the United States labeling the country of origin on our meat. So right. Canada and Mexico are saying they're going to impose sanctions on the U.S. because we label where our meat comes from, and so that's
And we shouldn't label where our meat comes from.
Yeah.
What's the concern?
under some pre-existing trade agreements. Yeah, the WTO ruled against the United States. I think more than once, and now, the Mexico and Canada,
we've already established that eating meat is, practically a sin against Mother Earth.
That's a whole different issue, though. This applies to GMO labeling, and this just shows the character of these trade deals. It's all meant for more corporate control, more to protect corporate profits, while putting that glossy veneer saying, "Oh, we're helping poor people, we're bringing out of poverty." Yeah, you are, but at the same time, that's not why you're doing it, and you're not really trying to deal with the roots of poverty, and you're not really dealing with the bigger issues, the deeper economic issues that are at hand. That,
I guess one of the
really
things
don't talk about anyway.
One of the things I'd like to say is that I don't really oppose, for example, free trade on principle in the sense that we might get more auto parts from Japan, and Japan might get some of our American beef.
I sort of do.
Okay,
that's
our
great.
But I'm talking now.
Yeah. I'm waiting for you to get to the point, man.
So I don't really care that we trade things. I think that's perfectly fine. I think it creates economic efficiency. I think it can lower the cost of materials. I think it can increase profits, and then in that way make people's retirement accounts grow, because everyone should be saving for their retirement and putting it in some index fund with Vanguard or something like that. The problem I have is that
are we plugging corporate funds here on Plutocracy now?
Yes,
who's paying you, man?
But here's the thing. Just because as a whole human society is raping the environment, we're destroying the environment to generate these sorts of profits and improve our well-being, we also have to, at the same time, we can't outlaw trade. That's like outlawing natural human behavior. But what we have to do is we have to tax economic activity. We have to make sure corporations pay taxes. We have to make sure we have a welfare system set up so that people don't fall through the cracks and end up suffering. We have to take it seriously, but we shouldn't penalize economic activity just because it leads to bad things.
This is the thing, though, that I think is that if I have, because like you said, I don't necessarily have a problem with free trade, but what I would like to see is a simple policy where we make one-on-one agreements. If you want to make an agreement with India or Vietnam, by all means, meet with them, have relatively transparent negotiations, and proceed. That's the way you do trade. The problem is when you do these multinational, multi-regional agreements, every nation has different interests, and every citizens in those nations have different interests. It's not just the United States.
Aren't represented. The citizens don't seem to have
it's not just the United States
it's totally
that might have some complaints. There are, for example, beef farmers in Japan and farmers in like rice farmers in South Korea. And they don't like it because they're going to massively import or begin to import cheaper like U.S. beef, U.S. rice, which probably is technically good for our country. But these are small, independent farmers with families, basically the equivalent of middle class in Japan, South Korea. And, they're at a risk of having their livelihoods destroyed or severely damaged because of that trade agreement, in the same way that we saw with our auto workers and factory workers in the Rust Belt, like Ohio and Michigan, in states like that suffered from NAFTA. So it's not even just about the U.S. It's about people all over the world.
Free trade, it's just like the same problem with just pure capitalism or free market anything. It's just totally blind. We've got to take things into account. I mean, we shouldn't just have free trade with countries that and have agreed to have free trade with countries that might have sweatshop labor and stuff. We should impose like higher tariffs that almost make it restrictive to use that type of stuff, and just somehow deal with that because
I mean
otherwise this is
where I have
even just beyond that. But
there's a difference between every nation. I would say that most people, reasonably, like Australia or New Zealand, those are nations that have appropriate environmental, labor, and other protections, or at least reasonable ones.
And even just to protect like the economic interests of that country. I mean, to at least represent the interests of those people to some degree.
If I want to go buy, Vegemite from Australia and it's imported, by all means. If they want to buy Ritz crackers from the United States, then by all means. But those are the type of agreements you want to make, not just cutting deals to have a bunch of different interests represented, or with nations that frankly do abuse their workers, like Bangladesh.
Here's what I'm seeing here is we're having two different debates at the same time. On one hand, we're talking about whether or not the way that some of the international system has been set up, whether or not it's fair, whether or not the WTO issuing rulings is fair, or whether or not companies are getting immunity in some ways. Yeah. And on that side, I have a lot of sympathy with liberals and with anybody else who is insisting that we should have a fairer international system. But on the other hand, I feel like a lot of the argument that you guys are sending at me is just anti-free trade, including when you say that, you don't want farmers to lose their jobs, or when Scott says that he doesn't want jobs going to places that would have sweatshops. The issue I have with this is that from our point of view, including from my point of view, when I look at sweatshops, the immediate thing I think of is that looks horrible compared to my standard of living. But if you compare that compared to the standard of living that's normal in these countries, this is an improvement. This is them moving up.
True.
And for our modern sensibilities, it looks disastrous. But at the same time, how else do you get these countries to grow without starting at that point and then moving up?
Well, I mean, we could at least place some extra tariffs on companies and products that where their manufacturing plants have to have suicide nets. Can we start there? Where the workers want to kill themselves, but they don't let them.
Maybe there's something we could create for that.
But that would be anti-free trade, wouldn't it? What if that would violate the holy principle of free trade? That's a very interesting wrench that you're throwing at me. I'd have to think a little bit about that.
But in general, I wouldn't want to overly penalize countries that are poor because we look at their poverty and feel bad at it, and then blame it on free trade.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying just blame like a country. We'd have to take reality into account and stuff, but I mean, there is more that we could do. I mean,
you guys,
and I'm saying that's just one issue. Sweatshops is just one issue. Even just to protect the long term. I mean, environment, long term environmental.
Well, okay. So because here's an issue to think about right now. Right now, for the first time, Africa's economy is actually growing at a faster rate than the rest of the world.
That's right.
And a lot of this is happening because of globalization. And now Africa wants to get even more globalized, and that's what the countries there are moving for. Do you support that? Do you think more free trade with Africa is a good thing, or would you oppose it?
Well, I mean, trade. Why does trade have to be free trade?
Yeah,
I mean, like all the countries should be able to protect their interests. Yeah. I mean, those countries, all those African countries, should be able to trade and govern their own trade where they'll protect the interests of the working class in those countries, which they won't do because most of them are corrupt. But
it just means trading without tariffs and without all these regulations.
What if a tariff is going to help the working class of a country? What if importing something is really going to hurt the working class of a country, and And even what if it's ecologically not and economically just not sensible, even in a larger scheme? Like, why would you?
I'm trying to think of an example where a tariff would be beneficial for a country. Would you be able to give me an example of that?
Say, if instead of NAFTA, we, raise tariffs on Japanese autos, I mean, that's part of why they're not signing on to the TPP. They've had some problems with that over, I heard a couple months ago.
Sure.
I'll give an example. We have a domestic solar panel industry, and there have been many allegations against China for dumping solar panels on the market way below what they could be conceivably priced at to factor in the cost of production. So it can protect domestic manufacturers when other countries are clearly
Boom.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, but see, now this is actually interesting because this is a case of where a poor country is using tax subsidies in order to make themselves more advantageous compared to rich countries. So I was thinking more so of actually protective things. That's kind of almost the opposite of a protective thing, where they're breaking rules by making their stuff much cheaper to the rest of the world.
Protective for the U.S.
Well, it would be protective for the U.S. to refuse to trade with China on that grounds. But even there, the United States would be able to point out
all
that.
trade.
You
with
have to
China.
refuse all trade.
No, I didn't say all trade. I'm just.
you just
I did say
trade.
trade. Trade for solar panels, to be specific.
This is the thing, is that I've consistently, if I ask this question, I say I'm for fair trade, not necessarily free trade.
Boom.
It doesn't have to necessarily be free or more.
And what's the difference?
protectionist. The difference is this, is that if you're considered to be an elected official or some other person of authority by the citizens of your country, then it's within your exact reason and expectation to try to protect their interests the best. I would expect a leader in Vietnam to do the same. I would expect a leader in South Africa to do the same. And I certainly would expect a United States leader to do the same. Whether they do or not is a different story, but that has to be the expectation. So I don't think that there's a problem with looking after our own citizens first as best we can. We talk about this with military intervention. Generally, sometimes there is an appropriate time to intervene, but normally the calculus is there's a lot of things we could go do in the world. We could go overthrow Kim Jong-un in North Korea, because he's really really bad to people and kills millions and all that kind of thing. But we don't, because we're looking out for our citizens and saying that.
All right, real quick, let's see who's looking out for us on this. The U.S. Trade Representative for this TPP is Michael Froman. He came out of he was chief of staff under Robert Rubin, the late '90s. So thanks for that financial crisis, buddy. But he is, and of course, went to Citigroup with Robert Rubin. Of course, he's the CEO of Citi Insurance. It's great, and now he's looking out for our interests in the TPP. And
I think he's looking out for the average American.
It also came out. Here's some proof that he's looking out for the average American on May 2nd, 2013. Well, he became the trade rep, but some financial documents I guess he had to release then showed that he had $500,000 in an offshore fund at Ugland House in the Cayman Islands, which Obama once described as the biggest tax scam in the world. Your man.
Well, that's just free trade. If you want to move your currency across borders freely, then that's just free trade between nations.
No, that's not what I consider free trade.
So this is the guy. This is our point man on the TPP.
Here's what's
straight out of Citigroup.
But I still want to get back at what you were saying about fair trade earlier, Steen, because even though you say this with such a nice accent and you say it so charmingly,
But what about the wrenches that I threw at you? Like that's what he's talking about, and you still
the wrench you threw at me was just an interesting proposal. But in this case, if every country is only negotiating for what they view as specifically being good for them, and they're just picking and choosing, what you wind up with is that each country is going to pick and choose and only what makes sense, and then you're going to agree to nothing because you're going to realize I'm going to lose on this issue, you're going to win on this issue, so I'm not going to agree with you there. I want to win on this issue, but you lose on this issue, so you're not going to agree with you there.
This is why you do one-on-one business.
It's the reason that you get rid of them altogether. When you come up with a free trade deal, you just say get rid of the tariffs, get rid of the restrictions, and just allow free trade.
International treaties.
Yeah, that's silly because our companies would demand it.
Doesn't our Constitution pretty much mandate that our Congress has authority to, restrict trade?
Yeah, no, they've always done this.
They would be waiving.
I remember
so
hearing
you're
this.
just want to abolish that little part of the Constitution.
I remember hearing a story. I think
I don't want to abolish any. Wait, hold on. Where are you getting that from?
Doesn't Congress have like constitutional authority to restrict, regulate trade?
The Senate is
exactly
responsible for passing treaties. Yes.
That's why they're trying to fast track.
So why would you want there to be no restriction?
I'm trying to figure out what you're saying.
Well,
Yeah, I mean, no, I get it.
Here's the thing about framing.
you're basically
is
saying let's
Why don't we
ignore
just
this
change
part
the
of the
Constitution? So why
Constitution.
don't-
I'm not. Hold on.
just-
I'm not saying let's ignore a part of the Constitution. I'm saying
Why don't we just
the
rewrite it then,
Congress
make it
should
better?
do what I'm advocating that they should do,
Which is
which is do
Sign
more
the
free
agreement.
trade and
Yeah.
pass TPP.
Well, that's what they're about to do.
That's what they're about to do. I mean,
Yeah. No, I think they
the
will.
thing
and
is
this will
about-
benefit who? Who's going to be the winners? Who's going to be the losers?
I mean,
Not you. You're not going to
every country is expected to gain from this. Some people will have to get new jobs, just as what happens with any gains in efficiency in technology or in global trade. But overall, each country is expected
profits
to.
of the few who are going to go up, or
That's
is it going to
right.
be the situation and the?
And I want to go on the
masses?
record that Japan is a small island nation. It's way overpopulated, and I don't believe, Steen, for 1 second that there's room for a cow on that island.
Here's
group of islands.
here's the thing about framing is that people need to go on Twitter and look at who tweets in them. There's a bunch of lobbyists from the MPAA, the RIAA, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and all these corporate interests that especially young Americans, really hate because they sue your grandmother. So if you really want to support Froman and his friends of lobbyists that want to sue your grandmother,
Yeah, and if you want to
then by
go
all
to jail for
means-
downloading
Yeah.
Dumb and Dumber 2, you
Well,
know,
we gotta wrap
Joey
it up.
wants you to go to jail too. So
We gotta wrap it up.
looking out for you.
But in closing, I hope we can all agree that that we're all very excited about how free trade has lifted about 1 to 2 billion people out of total poverty, and hopefully we'll see another 1 to 2 billion people lifted out of poverty by globalization over
Well,
the next 10 to 20 years.
we know that the attorneys in India need some fees from suing Indian grandmothers for downloading music. So there we go.
There we go.